Now that Jamestown has been a successful colony, another colony is going to start up. And this one is formed by the Pilgrims. And the Pilgrims were Protestants who were treated poorly in England. Basically how it worked is sometimes you had a Catholic leader, a Catholic king or queen, and they were horrible against Protestants. Other times you'd have a Protestant king or queen, and they were pretty terrible against Catholics. It just kind of went back and forth. And right now, the Church of England was a big thing, and they weren't too fond of any other Protestant group. So these Pilgrims decided to leave and try their luck in the New World. And so they were going to create a colony that was going to be called Plymouth, after Plymouth, England. Creative naming. You'll find that we never have creative names in America. So they move, and they take a ship called the Mayflower, which you've heard of, and they head on over. And something you need to know about these Pilgrims is they don't believe that the Church of England can be saved. They think it's kind of ruined, it's doomed, and so they want to separate from the church. So they're called separatists. So remember, Pilgrims are separatists. We're going to have something else later called non-separatists, but these are separatists, that's Pilgrims. So they come over, and their leader's name is William Bradford. So William brings them across on the Mayflower, and they get in a little bit of a storm. They're supposed to actually settle in Virginia, pretty close to Jamestown, not too far away, but the storm gets them off track, and they end up in the New World, and they're in Massachusetts, off of Cape Cod. And the way to remember Cape Cod, it's shaped like a C, cod. So they end up there, and Plymouth Rock is where they land, and they decide, well, this is out of our jurisdiction. The King's Charter said we're allowed to settle in Virginia. This is not Virginia. So they create a new government to give it some legitimacy. And it's called the Mayflower Compact. And the Mayflower Compact, or agreement, is the first written government in the New World. So you're going to want to know the Mayflower Compact. And guess where they wrote it? On the Mayflower. So they didn't want to go on land until they had the government planned out. So they parked the boat, they wrote it out, and then they went on shore. So important thing about the Mayflower Compact is they used democratic rule or majority rule. And this is where decisions were made by the group voting. They would choose something and everyone basically raise their hand, yay, nay type of thing. And whatever the majority chose, that's what happened. So we're looking at some democratic principles which are going to lead to our government later on. So they have a rough time at first, just like they did in Jamestown. And what's worse is they weren't planning on being in Massachusetts where it's a little bit cold. All right, they thought they were going to be in Virginia, a lot warmer. So they weren't prepared for it. But luckily, some Native Americans are going to help them out. And you're going to be reading a journal entry that someone made about when Samoset came to visit. And he had an interesting meeting with him. But what you need to know right now is that he's the one that introduced the English to the Native Americans. And he introduced them to someone very important named Squanto. So Samoset is the one that met them. And Squanto is the one who's actually going to teach them a lot. They both were English speaking. They had interactions with English before. And Squanto decides that he's going to teach them how to grow corn. He's going to teach them how to fish, teach them what berries are good for you and which ones are poisonous and will kill you, and other things like that. And this relationship is going to lead to the Pilgrims having a much better time than Jamestown had in terms of survival. And they're going to flourish and do very well, and they're going to, for the most part, have pretty peaceful relations with the Native Americans here. And so they have a little party to celebrate, and we call it Thanksgiving. This has been a thing that's been done before. It wasn't anything new, except it was in the New World for the first time, right? You've always been taught that wrong. That's not true. That's actually the second. It's that Thanksgiving. The first one was actually in Jamestown. And the reason we don't celebrate that Thanksgiving is the first historians were actually in Massachusetts, like Harvard, all those schools that started up there. And so what history did they care about? Their own history. So that's why we celebrate the wrong first Thanksgiving.